This happened when I was 18, heading out on my first big road trip alone, driving my old SUV packed full of everything I owned, all the way from my hometown to my new college. My nerves were already high, not just for the long drive, but because it was my first time really leaving home for an extended period. The map said the journey was 600 miles, so I planned to split it into 2 days. It estimated I'd reach my hotel by 11 at night, but with potential traffic, gas stops, and getting food, I figured it would be much later. By 7 the sun had completely vanished, and the highway had mostly cleared out. Occasionally a car would pass, their headlights slowly fading in the distance. But for most of the drive, it was just me. This lonely stretch made me surprisingly tired and bored. Around 10, I decided to pull over at the next gas station before tackling the final part of the drive. About 10 minutes later, I took an exit and found myself at a gas station. Being so far out, there was no town, just a few pumps and a small store. No other cars were around, not even distant lights from houses or buildings. I parked right at a pump and stepped out to fill my tank. As I looked around, I was almost startled by a man walking toward me. He looked much older than me, probably in his 50s, and honestly seemed homeless. Being approached out here was completely unexpected, and his brief, odd smile didn't make me feel any better. "Do you need something?" I asked, hoping he wouldn't come any closer. The man stopped a few feet from my car and glanced around cautiously before replying, "Take the exit back onto the highway." I looked at him, confused, not sure I understood. He pointed behind me, toward the exit I'd just used, and repeated, "Take the exit back onto the highway." After a second, I simply said okay, and he walked off. But I was still really puzzled. The exit he wanted me to take, again, was a one-way road. By his logic, he wanted me to drive the wrong way, and then do a U-turn back onto the highway. It just didn't make any sense. I looked at the correct entrance road, the clear path I was supposed to take. There were no signs of construction or anything blocking it. It looked like a perfectly empty ramp back to the highway. As I put the pump back and got into my car, I glanced over at the man. He was now just sitting against the side of the convenience store. The more I thought about it, the crazier he seemed, just sitting there saying strange things. I wondered if this was some kind of trap. So I followed my gut, drove out of the lot, and headed for the proper highway entrance. As I merged on, though, I noticed that almost all the streetlights were out. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was a construction zone or something. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, being extra careful. But as I moved through the unlit stretch, I saw only a brief shape to my left, before a pickup truck suddenly appeared and slammed to a stop, right in front of my car. Every door flew open as 4 men jumped out and ran toward my car. They held all sorts of weapons, metal bats, machetes, and their faces were uncovered, showing only a cold, empty stare, like what they were doing meant nothing to them. I quickly started backing up as they got within a few feet of my window. Once I was far enough back, I suddenly saw the outlines of dozens of people emerging from the shadows on the roadside. A few even tried to chase my car as I frantically reversed out of there. As soon as I could, I spun around and sped off. I called 911 once I felt safe, but for some reason I never got a call back. No updates at all. It was almost like they didn't even investigate it. Ironically, it was that creepy old guy at the gas station who tried to warn me and keep me out of that mess. Or at least that's what I think he was doing. Either way, I was incredibly lucky to escape with my life. I still have no idea what that was, or what they were planning to do. It was a regular Friday, after my college classes, and I was spending the night driving for DoorDash. This was my usual weekend routine, helping me pay for living expenses while on campus. The night started well, with plenty of orders and good earnings, but then it hit a slow patch after the busy dinner rush. Very few orders popped up, and the ones that did were low-paying, basically a waste of time. But after an hour of just driving around with nothing, an order finally came through that didn't look too bad. It was 8 miles away, but the payment made it worth it. Nothing crazy, but enough to make it not a rip-off like so many others. I accepted the order, ran into the restaurant to grab the bag, then hopped back into my car and started driving. The map said it would take 30 minutes, which I think was the longest I'd ever had for an order up to that point. Most houses were close to campus. Anything further than 15 or 20 minutes out usually meant bare fields. As I hit that 20-minute mark, it became exactly that, a few scattered houses far out in crop fields, and nothing else. The last 10 minutes of the drive were on an empty road, winding past these farms, until I finally reached the address. There was a dirt driveway connecting to the road, leading through a huge field, with a small house tucked far in the back. Driving through the field felt incredibly eerie. Even though I'm not someone who gets nervous without a good reason, this felt different. As I got further from the main road, the only sound was the low rumble of my car on the dirt. I parked in front of the house, grabbed the food bag, and left the car running as I stepped out. The night was quiet. The house was dark, with only a dim porch light glowing. I walked through the messy, overgrown grass and up to the porch, knocking on the door. As I waited, I looked back at my car, sitting in the dark, with the field of blackness stretching behind it. A moment passed, then I knocked again, but there was no answer, not even a sound from inside. It didn't take long for me to notice how strange this was. No lights were on in the windows, and the house looked old and falling apart up close. The only things that made me think it wasn't abandoned were the delivery order itself and that faint porch light. I looked at the light, wondering why it would be the only one on. By some chance, I recognized the top part of its casing. It was a cheap solar light. It charged during the day and turned on automatically at dusk, meaning no one had to be there to flip a switch. Just as I was putting this all together, I heard a rumbling sound behind me. I turned to see a car driving down the dirt path, pulling up right behind my car. I stood there, staring at their headlights, until a man stepped out. I called from the porch, asking if this was his order, but he didn't reply. He just stood by his car, silent and still. My heart pounded as I started to realize how bad this situation probably was. The quiet night only reminded me that there was no one around to help. I was stuck in the middle of a field, between an empty house and a silent stranger. In a split second, pure instinct, I dropped the bag of food and sprinted off the porch, running behind the house and straight into the field of grass. I glanced back, seeing the man coming after me. Frantically, I kept running. The further I went, the thicker and taller the grass became, until it was so high I couldn't see anything around me. By then I knew the guy couldn't possibly follow. I slowed down, catching my breath, moving carefully through the crops, trying to be as quiet as possible in case he was still trying to find me. Eventually, I made it to someone else's yard, and from there to a road where I finally had enough signal to call for help. Police picked me up and went to check on my car, but of course, the man was gone. I was surprised though, because my car hadn't been touched, and the bag of food was still on the porch of that abandoned house. That could only mean the man had other plans, likely far worse than just robbing. This happened during a road trip I was taking, on my way back from seeing family for the holidays. I usually prefer flying and don't like driving more than a couple of hours. But this year, tickets were ridiculously expensive for some reason. Over $1,000 for a round-trip flight just a few states away. I had planned to get home a few days before work, but a snowstorm hit on my departure day, forcing me to stay an extra 2 days before I could finally start the long drive. The roads were empty, well past the holiday rush, and most of the trip was far from any big city. The hardest part was always fighting off boredom and staying awake. The first 8 hours went smoothly enough. I was tired, but the snow on the road kept me focused and alert. It was around 10 at night, and I had a hotel booked in a small town about 2 hours ahead. As I drove, a small light appeared in my mirror. It was the headlights of someone behind me, the first person I'd seen on the road in over an hour. Their lights grew quickly, showing they were coming up really fast. Soon I could tell it was a large van. It was a one-lane road, so I couldn't move over, but I figured they'd just swerve around me since they were going so fast. But once they reached the back of my car, they matched my speed and stayed right behind me. After a few seconds, I realized they weren't trying to pass. We drove like that for almost 10 minutes. It was unsettling, just us on the road, with this huge van tailing me. Their following distance wasn't normal either. They were so close I couldn't even see their front bumper or license plate in my mirror. Maybe I was too quick to feel uneasy, but an exit for a gas station came up, and I decided to take it, hoping they'd stay on the highway and I could get some distance. but as I veered off and down the exit ramp, they stayed right behind me. I pulled into the gas station and parked at one of the pumps. The van pulled into the pump directly behind me. At this point, I just didn't know what was happening. Part of me thought this was something bad, but another part told me I was overreacting. I knew this was the only gas station for about 30 minutes, so it wasn't impossible they needed gas too. Before getting out to fill my tank, I turned off my car and looked around. The gas station store had its lights off and a closed sign on the door. I looked to the sides, nothing but empty darkness. No houses, no buildings, just a field covered in snow with a single road running through it. I checked my mirror again. A man was now standing outside the van, putting gas in, so I got out and began doing this. As the numbers slowly ticked up on the gas meter, the man quickly finished, put his pump back, and sealed his gas cap. I watched him walk to the back of his van, then heard the loud clank of the back door being lifted open. In that moment, a gut feeling, a pure instinct, screamed at me to get out of there. I ripped the pump out of my car. Not even a second later, 3 men were sprinting at me from around the back of the van. I dropped the pump on the ground and dove into my car, locking the doors just as one of them grabbed the handle, trying to yank it open. I was shaking, fumbling as fast as I could to start the car. All 3 men ran around, trying each door, but then they immediately sprinted back to their van before I even had a chance to pull away. When I finally did, I saw them drive off in the opposite direction, back the way we had come from. I told the police what happened, but I never heard back with any updates. I think it's clear they were trying to snatch people off that huge empty highway under the cover of night. What's truly scary is how confident and, for lack of a better word, professional the whole thing seemed. It was like the moment they realized I was safely in my car, and it wouldn't be easy. They just left without even needing to talk to each other. It was as if they'd done it many times before. What would have happened if they'd gotten me? I don't know, but I urge everyone to learn from my experience, because you might not be as lucky as I was. I was driving a truckload from the East Coast to a company on the far West Coast. This cross-country route was one I'd taken countless times over my nearly 20 years as a truck driver. It was always the same. Familiar roads, familiar truck stops, familiar everything. In all those years, nothing truly crazy had ever happened. A few odd moments maybe, but nothing that ever amounted to anything serious. So when I started this trip again, I had no worries. It was just another day at work. About 20 hours into the drive, a storm started, slowing me down. It was late, so I was already looking for the next truck stop to get some sleep. As I drove, a sudden light appeared behind me. The road was flat and straight, so I would have seen them coming in my mirror, but they were just suddenly right there. Maybe they had only just turned on their lights. I didn't know, but they quickly came right up to my trailer. I kept my eyes on them until they were so close that my trailer completely blocked them from view. All I could see were their headlights reflecting off the back of my truck. Then their lights shut off. I maintained my speed, constantly checking my mirrors, trying to see if they were still behind me, but I had no way to know. For someone to turn off their lights in the middle of a heavy storm was insane, and to be tailing me so close was just as crazy. Thankfully, a sign showed a truck stop was only 5 miles ahead. At least I knew I was close to getting away from whatever this was. I didn't want to jump to conclusions based on strange behavior alone, but as a trucker, it's hard not to think about the possibility of an attempted robbery, especially when you're alone on the road at night. For the rest of those 5 miles, I saw no sign of them behind me. I was still on edge because I couldn't really see much anyway, but I started to feel less worried. As I approached the truck stop, I pulled in, trying to check my mirrors for any followers, but with the rain and poor lighting, it was impossible to tell. The truck stop was mostly empty, just a few trucks at the gas pumps. I pulled off to the side and parked in the middle of the lot. After waiting a minute and organizing some of my gear, I opened the truck door and leaned my head out, looking along the side of the trailer. I was soaked by the rain in a matter of seconds, but as far as I could tell, there was no car behind me. I closed the door and finally felt a sense of relief. I grabbed my pillow and blanket from the passenger side, locked the doors, turned off the truck, and tried to get some sleep. The rain pounding on the metal roof made it easy to drift off, blocking out any sounds from other trucks pulling in and out. When I woke up though, it felt like I'd only been asleep for a few minutes. I looked around. It was still dark, and the storm was the same, if not worse. But before I could check my mirrors, a loud thump shook the entire truck. My eyes flew open. I reached for the door handle and opened it, looking out at the back of the trailer. Through the pouring rain, I could barely make out the shape of a car with its headlights off, and two men moving around in front of it. Terrified, I hesitated to step out and confront them. As I sat there, frozen in that moment of indecision, the door suddenly slammed against my body, shoving me further back into the driver's seat. Another man stood outside, yelling at me to stay where I was, then slamming the door shut again. His right hand was shoved deep into his hoodie, and with two other men behind the truck, I was in no position to try anything. I could feel the truck shake as I sat there, paralyzed, the guy outside my door watching my every move. He didn't even look away for a second. This went on for a few minutes, then they ran back to their car and drove off. I was still in shock watching their car vanish down the road. I called the police and filed a report, but no information ever came up about who the men were. All I know is that if I had been less aware and had simply tried to drive off at first sight of them, I probably wouldn't have made it out as safely as I did. Back in 2019, I delivered pizzas for a place near my school. I worked most days after class to help pay for my car, and it wasn't a great job, but it was enough to get me through college without being completely broke. This particular night started like most others. I clocked in at 6 and delivered pizzas for 3 hours straight, then took a quick break and started again at 9:30. I picked up the next order and headed out. The address didn't look like a house, and the route it took me on wasn't what I expected. It led me further out of town, away from most homes and stores, into a business park. It was an area filled with small office buildings and nothing else. I drove down the road, struggling to read the addresses, so I just followed the GPS directions, hoping it would lead me to the right parking lot. When I finally turned in, I drove through a long parking area until I reached the front of a building and could read the address. It matched the order, but something felt off. The parking lot was completely empty. Not even the streetlights were on, and the office building showed no signs of anyone inside. I double-checked the address, thinking there must be a mistake, but it was correct. I even tried searching online for similar addresses nearby, but no, this was it. I put my car in park and got out, glancing around before walking up to the door. It was a glass door with a dark tint. I knocked, took a step back, and waited. After only a moment, the door opened. A middle-aged man stood there, dressed in very casual clothes, with a small grin on his face. He suddenly became overly excited, saying he was happy the food had finally arrived, and that everyone was hungry. I looked behind him, not seeing anyone else, only a single dim light on in the middle of the hallway. I ignored it and just told him the total. He must have noticed my gaze though, because he quickly explained that everyone else was in the rec room on the 3rd floor for a company party. I smiled politely, but the man was talking with such overwhelming excitement that it almost felt forced, like he was faking it. He pulled out his wallet and handed me cash for the pizzas, plus a generous $10 tip. As I took the money, he asked for a favor. He wanted help bringing the pizzas up to the 3rd floor. He had put me in a strange spot. Having already taken the tip, it felt wrong not to help. On the other hand, carrying a few pizzas wasn't exactly hard, and it didn't seem necessary for him to ask. He started walking without waiting for my answer, urging me to follow him as he headed toward a door leading to a stairwell. I trailed behind, keeping my distance as I entered. Inside the stairwell, I felt a rush of cold air and noticed all the lights were off. Only that small light from the hallway lit the entrance to the stairs. The man started making his way up, but stopped when he realized I hadn't followed. He turned and made a joking remark about the lights, but his grin quickly vanished when he saw I still wasn't moving. Without a moment's hesitation, he rushed down toward me, pure anger in his eye. I tossed the pizzas to the ground, bursting out of the door and into the hallway, then running for the exit and bolting to my car. I saw the man appear briefly at the front doors before going back inside and slamming them shut. I immediately called the police after driving to a different parking lot. The man had run off by the time they arrived, and since he paid in cash, there was no way to identify him. The office building was empty though, and there was no one else on the 3rd floor. It was clear it had been some kind of trap. What he had waiting for me on the 3rd floor is unknown, and I hope no one ever has to find out. I used to deliver Chinese food for a local restaurant when I was just a teenager in high school. Any job I got then wasn't going to be for more than a year or two. This job was pretty typical for most first jobs,
or retail and food service roles, some slow, boring days, and some busy, stressful ones. As the delivery driver though, I was always thankful not to be stuck inside the store dealing with crowds of customers. On this particular night of Friday, I started my 6 p.m. to midnight shift. As soon as I clocked in, I was delivering orders non-stop for the next 2 hours, with no time to breathe. By 8, orders started to slow down, but I still had a few more to deliver before my lunch break. So I grabbed 3 orders and set out to get them done before 9. The first one was close, but the next 2 were further out. This wasn't unusual, as our town wasn't all tightly packed together. I dropped off the second order and then headed to the final stop. It was 10 minutes from where I was, and the tag said it hadn't been paid for yet. All I could think about during this drive was the break I'd finally get afterward. 3 hours straight of driving back and forth had tired me out more than usual tonight. I pulled into the neighborhood and followed the GPS until I reached a back section where the whole atmosphere suddenly changed. I turned onto a narrow road of cracked pavement and potholes, with small, barely visible houses on the side, hidden by thick bushes and messy lawn. When the GPS told me I'd arrived, I stopped the car but didn't see a house. I turned on my brights and ever so faintly, I could see the outline of a small house quite far from the road. Then I looked at the grass leading up to it, and realized there was actually a driveway. It was just completely swallowed by vines and tall grass. I would never have seen it if I hadn't spotted the house first. Knowing I couldn't even drive on it, I put the car in park and got out with the food bag, then began to walk through the overgrown drive. I couldn't believe how terrible it was to walk through, and I couldn't imagine anyone letting their driveway get to this state. Getting closer, I could see more of the house. It was very small, like an old trailer home, and looked just as run down as the driveway. Vines grew over the windows and bushes covered every inch of the almost decaying structure. As I made my way to the front door, I knew something was wrong. I knew it in my gut and in my head, but I was just a kid with a first job, scared to lose it. So I felt like I had to do my job, which was to deliver the order to this address. I pushed all my bad feelings aside and knocked on the door. Right away I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, revealing a young lady behind. At first, in the dim light, she looked very normal, and I felt a huge wave of relief, but it only took a few more seconds to realize that her normal, well-dressed look was strangely out of place. With the condition of this house, there was no way she could be so neat and tidy in a place like this. As these thoughts raced through my head, she opened the screen door and said in a creepily calm voice, "Come in." Everything in me screamed at that moment. I stumbled back a few steps, knowing I had to leave immediately. I turned around, and only a second after I started to walk away, I heard a thud from the side of the house. I looked over, seeing 2 men running out from behind the house and sprinting through the bushes toward me. I dropped everything and started running. I did everything I could to get through the thick grass and vines, but just as I reached the end of the driveway, I tripped over something and fell to the ground. I scrambled back up, hearing their footsteps closing in. I couldn't even bring myself to look back as I ran straight to my car, jumping in and turning it on. The men immediately stopped and ran back to where they came from. With my whole body still shaking from adrenaline, I turned the car around and drove away. Of course, I told my boss what happened, and he urged me to call the police and report it. I was really relieved to know he didn't care about the lost order, only my safety. Looking back, it would have been awful if it had been any other way. Police interviewed me and my boss and conducted a full investigation. But ultimately, they couldn't find any of the people. The property I was on, it turned out, was actually state-owned, and the no trespassing sign at the beginning of the road had been dug up and thrown into the tall grass. Their intentions are still unknown, but it seems like the most obvious possibility is the most likely. I just hope nobody else has to go through what I did, or if they do, I hope they can be as lucky as I was to get away. I had some free time that night, and after chugging a few coffees earlier, I figured I'd use the energy to go out and make some extra money. I was delivering for DoorDash, cruising on the highway to my next drop-off. It was super late, the roads were empty, and the night was perfectly peaceful, basically every delivery driver's dream. On my way there, my phone started buzzing. It was the customer calling me, but before I could answer, they hung up. Since it only rang for a couple of seconds, I thought it might have been an accident. But just in case, I redialed their number. It rang for a while, but they didn't pick up. I shook my head and dismissed it, not thinking about it for the rest of the drive. I got off the highway and drove into the neighborhood. It was a very normal street with average houses. When I pulled up to the house for my delivery, I parked right in the driveway and started walking to their porch. As I was setting down the bag, I saw that the front door was slightly cracked open. I wasn't sure if it was left that way for me, so I just knocked lightly and called out that I was dropping off their food. As soon as I did, I heard a somewhat disturbing sound come from down the hallway. It was a muffled thump, almost like it mimicked my knocking, like someone was banging on a door. A bit shaken, I opened the front door wider and called out again. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just repeated that I was delivering their food. A few quiet moments passed. Then I heard a door open from the back of the house, and a guy came around the corner. He looked distressed and bothered, but I couldn't tell if it was because of me or something else entirely. The guy walked down the hall and right up to the doorway where I stood, not saying a word as he started to reach for the bag. But then I heard those thumps again from down the hallway. I looked past him in confusion, as he turned and looked too, then quickly turned back and looked at me, realizing I'd heard it. "Is everything okay?" I asked carefully. The sound echoed through the walls again, as the man just stared at me, like he was trying to figure out what to do. "Why don't you bring the food inside for me?" he said, almost in a demanding tone.
Nervously, I picked up the bag, but quickly realized what a terrible idea this was. I felt pressured, like I had to follow him, but I also had a strong feeling that if I did, I wouldn't be making it out of there. In my hesitation, the guy's face showed he was even more bothered, even angry. He then reached out and snatched the food right from my hands, then slammed the door in my face. Stunned, I stood there for a moment, listening as his footsteps went down the hallway and the thumping stopped. I couldn't do anything else at this point, so I hurried off the porch and got to my car. I ended my DoorDash shift after that one and ended up reporting the truly disturbing situation to the police. I think what finally made me report it was that the man tried to get me to come inside his house. If not for that, I might not have felt there was enough evidence to do anything. Unfortunately, though, police informed me hours later that the man denied anyone else was there and declined their request to search his home. At that point, there was nothing left to do other than speculate. I believe there was something truly horrible going on, and he was possibly ready to do the same to me, but I don't think we'll ever know for sure. I was driving back from a friend's house, about an hour away. We lost track of time, so I didn't leave until around 2 in the morning. I was really tired, and the drive was incredibly boring. Most of the way home was a long, straight road that seemed to have no other cars on it. For the first 20 minutes, it was just me, staring at the endless pavement ahead, trying desperately to keep my eyes open. But then, my headlights suddenly lit something up on the road far ahead of me. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but as I got closer, I had to slow down and eventually stop. There was a semi-truck parked right in the middle of the road, blocking both lanes. I sat there for a few seconds, completely bewildered. At this point on the road, we were at least 30 minutes from town, and there was absolutely nothing else out here. The only reason anyone would stop like this was if there was a serious emergency. I looked to the right of the truck. There might have been just enough room to squeeze around the trailer, but there was a steep hill on the shoulder that would have been incredibly risky to drive on. On the other side of the truck, trees were too close together for me to get through. After sitting there for a whole minute, I figured this had to be an emergency, and that my best, maybe only option was to check on them. I got out of my car and started walking toward the front of the trailer. I remember how quiet it was outside, like the night was completely still and empty. As I reached the front, I saw that a light was on in the driver's cabin. I went up to the door and lightly knocked, then called out, asking if they were okay. The window was too high to see through from the ground. After a few seconds, there was still no response. I called out again, but there wasn't even the sound of any movement inside. My gut screamed that something was seriously wrong. I looked down the road ahead, then back at the road I came from, seeing nothing but fog in the distance, which only reminded me how far away I was from anyone else. I grabbed the side of the door and pulled myself up onto the steps, then looked inside the window. There was stuff scattered everywhere, almost like they'd crashed or something, making the whole cabin a total mess. But no one was inside. Then I noticed the door on the other side was wide open. I stepped back onto the road and started walking around the truck to investigate the open door. But I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw a man emerging from the forest, walking up the side of the hill. He was tall, with shoulder-length hair, and looked very disheveled. "Hey man, are you okay?" I asked. The man didn't look at me, but kept coming up from the forest and onto the road. In the faint light from my headlights, I saw dark red stains all over his clothes, and his face was covered in dirt and grime. Clearly, he was not okay. I offered to help, but he still didn't acknowledge me. That was until I said I could call 911 for him. He immediately stopped walking and glared at me, holding eye contact for a few long, tense seconds. "I'm fine," he said in a deep, threatening tone. I stopped talking and watched him get into the truck. Then I rushed back to my car as the truck started driving away. I turned around and drove straight back to my friend's house, where I called 911 and gave every detail I could remember. Unsurprisingly, the case never went further than that. What happened on that road is still a mystery, one that still terrifies me. The way the truck was stopped, sideways, with the cabin looking so chaotic, I think something or someone forced them to stop. What happened afterwards is debatable, but the man I saw probably wasn't the original truck driver, and I think we can all guess what likely happened in the forest below the road. I work for my dad at his small construction business. He runs a yard and warehouse full of materials, and also manages the job sites where the workers are. Since I was only 17 at the time, my job was basically to be the errand boy. I'd drive materials back and forth and pick up anything needed. Depending on the job, some materials had to be delivered before the workers arrived, so they could start right away in the morning. So every once in a while, during busy weeks, I'd have to start work really early, like 2 or 3 in the morning, to make sure everything was dropped off on time. Of course, this was only during the summer when I didn't have school, so I had no excuse not to work. I actually liked doing these early deliveries because it was calm, and I didn't have anyone telling me what to do. On this particular day, I arrived at the warehouse at 3 a.m., loaded up, and started my way to the job site. It was a repair job on an old, maybe even abandoned, building at the edge of town. When I got there, I saw a truck parked right outside. Its lights were off, and it didn't look like anyone was nearby. It was way too early for anyone to be working, so I wasn't expecting to see any vehicles. I parked and got out, walking up to the truck. It wasn't a company vehicle either, and the windows were tinted, so I couldn't see inside. I turned and looked at the building, calling out to see if anyone was there, but got no response. Feeling a little weird about it, I pulled out my phone and called my dad. It rang for a minute, then went to voicemail, figuring it was probably just a worker's personal truck that they'd left there. I went back to my truck and started unloading the materials. That took about an hour. Then I got back in and started to drive off. As I left the area, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and suddenly, the truck's lights turned on. I practically slammed on my brakes, stopping on the side of the road, and watching as the truck started to back out. Someone had been in there the whole time. Knowing that, I was sure it couldn't have been a worker, because they definitely would have answered me. I sat and watched as they made their way out of the parking area and onto the road. I grabbed my phone and quickly dialed my dad's number again. While I waited for him to pick up, I looked over and saw the truck had stopped right next to me. I stared at their window, knowing someone behind it was probably staring back at me. I tossed my phone on the seat and started to drive forward, but the truck quickly matched my speed, preventing me from getting back onto the road. But there was nowhere else for me to go. To my left were trees, and to my right, this truck was blocking my way. I started to panic, putting the car in reverse and trying to back up. The truck did the same until they tapped the side of my car, making me lose control. I slid completely off the shoulder and hit the side of a truck. The truck quickly stopped right at the top of the road, as if they were going to get out. But then their brake lights suddenly turned off again, as they put it back in drive and sped away. Just 20 seconds later, another car pulled up to the side of the road, and a man got out and ran up to me, asking if I was okay. I didn't know his name at the time, but it was one of the workers just arriving at the job site. He only saw the last part of what happened, but said he recognized the other truck as Samuel's, another worker my dad had hired a few months ago. As it turned out, A bunch of tools and materials were missing from the job site, adding up to almost $10,000. And that was just from that one night. He could have been slowly stealing things over the past few months. I think what happened that night was that Samuel thought that by me seeing his truck, it would eventually all be traced back to him, and he'd get caught. So he tried to stop me. I don't know what he would have done to me, but considering I was the only witness, it's likely he wouldn't have gotten caught, as long as I was never seen again. Unfortunately though, his name and everything else didn't lead to anything, and it was likely he was either an undocumented immigrant or some kind of felon who went through the effort of getting fake or stolen IDs and work. I was never expecting something like that to ever happen, but at least it's really unlikely that I'll ever see that man again. I'm a local truck driver for a common grocery store in our city. This means I stay within a 50-ish mile radius, driving between the warehouse and several stores every day to deliver pallets of groceries. I don't have to make any drives longer than 2 hours, so every night I get to go home at a reasonable time and sleep in my own bed, instead of at a truck stop like most cross-country or regional truckers. This day was pretty average, going between a few stores and delivering the pallet. I got to my last delivery location around 9. It took about half an hour for them to empty the trailer, but then I was good to head back to the warehouse and finish for the night. This was always the longest drive though, as the warehouse was on the edge of the city, away from everything. An hour into the drive, and about 15 minutes from my destination, I pulled into a gas station to fill up, having been running on empty for probably too long. I went into the diesel section and started the gas pump. As I leaned against the truck and waited, I saw a group of people standing outside a parked pickup truck on the other side of the gas station. They were the only ones there, but they kept eyeing me, looking over at both me and my truck. It was odd, but I just thought they were waiting for me to leave, probably so they could do something stupid without any witnesses. Once my truck was full, I put the pump back and got in, driving out of the gas station. As I did, the group got into their pickup and left as well, pulling up right behind me. Now it was definitely more than just odd. I still didn't know exactly what they were planning to do, but they weren't even trying to hide it. Over the next mile, as we got further toward the city's edge, they kept swerving around behind me, going in and out of the lane and unable to keep a steady speed. I got my phone from its mount and called the police to report the group for reckless and possibly drunk driving. Being in a huge semi, I didn't feel unsafe for myself, but I was worried for anyone else who might be on the road. After a couple more minutes, they swerved into the lane next to me and sped up until they were right across from my window. I looked down at them, seeing a few guys looking at me and saying something to the others. Then they sped up again and slammed on their brakes directly in front of me. I had no choice but to brake hard as well, stopping just before ramming into them. As soon as I stopped, all the doors swung open, and 4 of them came running to either side of my truck, trying to open the doors and get in. I immediately went into reverse, trying to put some distance between us before I put it back in drive. My only choices were to risk driving off the road, which might make my trailer topple over, or I could ram straight through their pickup. Obviously, I went straight through their truck. All 4 of them ran off the road just before I hit it, and after 30 seconds, I was long gone. By the time I got to the warehouse, police had already shown up at the scene, finding their pickup on the side of the road, and all 4 of them standing by it. As the officer put it, they were all drunk, but unwilling to explain what they were doing. Whatever they were trying to do, it was pretty scary having 4 aggressive, intoxicated guys trying to break into my truck. Although it all happened so fast and maybe doesn't seem that bad, I think if I hadn't acted so quickly, it easily could have escalated to something truly awful. But there's really no way to know what could have happened. I worked at Papa John's for a couple of years, at the end of high school and the beginning of college. I delivered pizzas and sometimes helped with cleaning, since I worked night. This was my normal 4 to 11 shift on a slow weekday. By 10, we weren't getting any more orders, so we started cleaning and getting ready for closing, so we could leave right at 11. But at 10:45, the store phone started ringing. I let my manager pick it up, and from what he was saying, I knew someone was placing an order. Despite my shift ending in 15 minutes, I still had to deliver it, so I was visibly annoyed. I waited for the pizza to be ready, then left just before 11. The address wasn't too far, I think just under 10 minutes away, but when I got there, I was a little confused. There was a long driveway going into the trees,
but I couldn't see any houses or lights at the end. I looked back at the map, zooming in, and saw that there was a house. It was just really far down. I turned onto the driveway and put my brights on. After the first part, which connected to the main road, it became a gravel path and was honestly hard to follow because it was thin and the trees were very close to the sides. Eventually it opened up a bit, and across a small field was an old wooden house. It was too big to be a cabin, but it definitely felt like a secluded middle of the woods cabin. There wasn't exactly a place to park, so I just stopped on the gravel and got out. A few of the outdoor lights were on, but they weren't bright at all, and most of the woods surrounding the area were completely dark. I started walking up to the door, hoping to do this quickly, because something about this place was starting to feel unsettling. I got up to the porch, and just before I knocked, I heard something behind me. It was the crunching of leaves in the woods near the gravel driveway I'd just come from. I looked out there for a second, but it was too dark to see anything, so I turned back and knocked on the door. While I waited, I looked back at my car, wishing I'd left the keys inside so the headlights would stay on. Even from the porch, it was hard to see more than just a small glare from the plastic reflectors. The rest of the car was hidden by the dim light coming from the house. I heard footsteps inside, then the door opened. It was an old man with short black hair and glazed over eyes. "I have a Papa John's pizza order for you," I said, holding out the box. There was a slight pause before the man slowly reached out and took it, looking me in the eyes the whole time. He set it down on a table next to him and got his wallet out, slowly counting through some cash. That's when I heard it again, leaves crunching behind me. I looked over my shoulder toward my car where the sound came from, but just when I thought I might have seen something, the man grabbed my shoulder. "Here for you," he said, holding out some cash. I took it, then quickly looked back at my car, but didn't see anything. A few seconds later, I was startled by the man slamming the door behind me. Before leaving the porch, I got my phone out and turned the flashlight on, then hurried back to my car, shining the light in all directions, but seeing nothing. I got in, made a small U-turn, then drove out of it. My unsettling feelings stayed with me the whole drive back, and after clocking out, I did a quick walk around my car. For the most part, everything looked okay, but once I got a closer look, I noticed some scratches near the passenger door handle that I didn't remember being there before. I couldn't verify anything though, and even if I could, I don't think there's really anything I could do. But I think someone was out there in the woods, trying to get into my car without me knowing. Maybe it was all just a set. I can't really say for sure, but if they'd gotten in, there's a chance they would have hid in the back seat and waited for me. What would happen after that is best left unknown.